Hello everyone and welcome to Slipjoint Sawyer. Today we're going to be doing a sort of a how-to or very basic how to build your own Swiss Army knife or rebuild one if you've taken it apart and you're just restoring one. I've got a couple of custom scales here, some standard liners, got some G10 liners, the fish tool, saw, blade, all the sort of usual stuff. This is pretty much everything you would need to rebuild a Swiss Army knife. Now you can sort of freehand it, I will say, as it is, hold it together when you're building it. It is quite awkward. What I've gone ahead and done is I've got this here. This is a 91mm assembly jig. So what this does is the pinholes go all in here and it holds it together for you while you're building it. Now I picked this up from Dom over at Custom Laser Art. He's got a really good presence on Instagram under the same thing. They are really reasonably priced. You can see, scan that, I take you straight to his Instagram. Got WhatsApp on the side here, and then you've got all his information on the back. He does loads of different stuff, laser engraving, all that sort of good stuff. He actually engraves stuff for Dan over at Bladebridge Customs as well, and you can also find him on Etsy. He's got engravingfiles.etsy.com. Really do recommend you checking him out. He's a really nice guy and he has some fantastic products. And one of my favorite things about this, it has a magnet here, so it holds the corkscrew in place without it wiggling about, but I'll show you that as we go through building it. So I'm just going to get myself set up and then we will come back. Okay, so I've got everything I'm going to need lined up at the top there. It is very simple to build your own Swiss Army knife once you've taken one apart. You do have to be quite delicate in the way that you put it back together though. Not that any of this it's fragile, it's more to do with peening the little brass rods, because of course brass is very sort of a soft metal. It can bend quite easily, and these little collars up here which you use to peen it over to hold it all together are quite fragile as well. But the first thing we're going to want to do is put a nice domed head on one end of all of these little brass rods. So 91mm takes two sides of brass rods. You have a 2.5mm brass rod for either end, and then the middle two are a 2.2mm. Now you can actually pick these sort of brass rods up on Amazon for very reasonably priced. I think I got a 30 centimeters of each for maybe about 10 to 12 pounds each, so very reasonable. Jig I think I paid about 45 pounds for, coming from Switzerland. That's where Dom is based. It also includes a disassembly which will hold it in place while you sort of drill out, if that's what you want to do. I prefer to sort of hammer mine out with a punch. I know a lot of people, you can sort of damage things that way, but if you're very careful, it's worked perfectly for me. Okay, so I'm going to move the camera off to the side and we'll go through how to peen the head of some of these pins. Okay, so we're just off to the side now. I've got my bench mounted vise. See the pin I have put inside the vise here with maybe 2.5 mil sticking up out of the top. Now you do have to tighten it down relatively tight, but you don't want to damage that brass. So just tight enough to hold it so that when you're hitting it with a hammer, it's not going to sort of slip down. And of course you need to use the ball side of the hammer for this. So it's very sort of simple to do. You just want to very slowly tap on the top. Not too heavy though, or you're going to bend it, or you're going to end up taking brass off, rather than just sort of leaving like a nice flattened surface on there. Now, am I perfect at this? No, not in a million years. Dan over at Bladebridge is way better than me at doing this. I'm very hammer-fisted, but you can see you've got a nice little flattened edge on there as well, and that will be perfect to have the collar on. So I'm not going to do all four and show you, but that's pretty straightforward in how to sort of flatten the edge there. I'll do the other three and then we will come back. Okay, so that's all the little brass rods with a nice head peened on them. See that there? They're not the best, but we can sand them down at the end as long as they're holding on that collar. It's not a problem at all. It's going to be, it's not coming off the end there. That's great. So we have two at the fatter ones for the ends, and then we have two thinner ones for the middle. Now the corkscrew or Phillips driver, whichever sits on the back tools, does not have a collar. It's just flattened over on one end. The other 3 have a collar, 2 large, 1 small, which is what we have here. So next up, we're going to grab the liner. This, of course, the only way really to do it is to start with the back liner, and this one is going to be a model with the corkscrew. So we're going to pop all the pins through their correct sort of holes. Can be a bit fiddly sometimes. Through there, this one through there. So the collar ones go on like this, and then the regular one just goes through like so. So you have 4 pins, and then that sort of just sits on there like that, very sort of snugly on the jig, and it holds it all for you, and you haven't got to try and mess around trying to hold it together, which is excellent. Now we take our first layer spring, which is of course the blade layer, and that fits just on here. And then we take our blade. Now the best way I found to do this is to put the blade off to the side like this, as that's the easiest tool to get in when you're putting them all together. The corkscrew, and we have the pen blade, and then don't forget the little sort of spacer tab, because the pen blade is actually thinner than the other tools, and that fits on in such a way that you can see this little right angle sits against the spring down here, and that sort of just goes on there like that. Next up, we're going to want to take one of the other liners. Now it's normally a different liner to this, but I couldn't find one of the correct, but this will work fine for what we're doing. So we want to grab one like this. Apologies, I did have the correct one. The reason I went back is I picked up too many of these, and you can see with the blade closing this way, we need one with the less, or sort of the further down swoop, whereas this one's quite up like that. But you just want to take that then and place it on top of the pins. Now it's a bit of a faff, just sort of got to wiggle the pins around to get them into position. Now don't worry about getting the blade and all that set up before putting the pins on, because you're going to have a bad time if you do that. It's an absolute pain in the ass. Now you can sometimes wiggle the blade in like this, but a tip that Dan at Blade Bridge taught me was to get yourself a punch and turn the jig on its side, and if you push the back spring with the jig, you can nearly cut yourself, and you can push that spring just a tad enough. If I show you, you see there the spring underneath and the blade on top. If you push the spring right about here, it's just enough that the blade will sort of drop a little bit, and you can then get that to fit. So there we go, pushed back a bit, the blade by my thumb dropped down, so we can now wiggle that a little bit, and the blade should, there we go, fall down into position. See that on there? So we can turn that back around, don't need the punch anymore, and there we have the first layer completed. Pen blade, main blade, corkscrew on there, and just for sort of safety measures, I do like to sort of close the tools, because I would probably cut myself if I didn't. So just make sure that's all pressed down then on there nice and tight. Next layer, I think we will go with the saw. So we want to get the spring for the saw. And this is what I mean, once you get the peening done, it's really easy and straightforward to put together. Now the saw goes on there, of course you've got the 2 holes there, pivot goes through there, and then this sort of middle pin goes on there. And this is why Dom's sort of 3D printed jig is, honestly, it's excellent. It won't work, unfortunately, for 84mm or anything larger than 91 or smaller than 91, really. This one is just for the 91, but being the most common size and sort of easiest to sort of customize, I would say, you can sort of do the rest sort of freehand as you sort of put it. But you can see for this now, as you could put another layer on top and push the spring, but for the saw, honestly, it's easier just to sort of wiggle it, and it just falls down like that. Put another layer on there then, which we will go for, get all the pins lined up. will go for the fish tool. Can be a little bit of a faff sometimes, but a little bit of wiggling, a little bit of persuasion, it all sort of goes together quite nicely. Give that a bit of a wiggle. Now you can see this one's being a bit of a pain in the arse. So there's two options. We can do the first method, which was to put another layer on and use the punch to do it, or you can get a pair of pliers like so and just very carefully pinch it down like that, and then it just slides on. Another layer on there then. Now, do you need to use sort of different colour G10 and stuff to rebuild a Swiss Army knife? No. If you take them apart carefully and if you drill or punch them out very carefully, you can reuse all the liners. I mean, that's what I've been doing. I've slowly been stockpiling liners and things. This is all ones that I've taken apart, bits and pieces like that. I've got a load of tools saved up as well for making different sort of custom ones, which I'll slowly be doing over time. So I've got a bag here of like files and scissors and things like that. But yeah, got the fish tool on there then as well. And if we lift it up, you can see that it's all held together. Now the pins will stick out a little bit on the bottom, but we can just sort of push those through at the end. And obviously I have overcut these to be way longer than needed, just to show you on a video to make it a little bit easier. But you could have probably done them, I know, half the size of that, and you would have been able to use it fine. You can see you have the tools on there, like so. Next up, we're going to want to do the final layer, which is the opening layer. And we have this spring here with, of course, the keyring attachment on it. That goes on there like so. You take that on there. Have the punch. Pop that on there like so. Close that down. And then we put the cap lifter on there, and you sort of just wiggle that about and it fits on pretty snugly, which is really nice to see when it just all sort of falls together nicely. And then if we pop the final layer on, like so. I can't see this pin. Is it going to go on, or is it going to be a pain? There we go. And there we have the sort of the standard build for that one, which is sort of very nice to see. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to we'll cut down the pins, and we will just sort of make sure all the tools have a nice action. If any action's not sort of as required, we can sort of take it back apart. A little tiny bit of bending on some of the springs if we want to make the pull a bit stronger on the main blade, which I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest. But if I wanted to make the pull strong on the main blade, we could just bend it a little tiny bit in the middle, and then it would make that pull a little bit stronger. But I will just go and set us up now for cutting the pins over on the vise, and we will be back. Okay, so once you get to this point, the jig is no longer required because you're all sort of assembled, all put together nicely. All that's left to do really is these pins here. Now you can put a collar on there and use it as a guide on how much to cut off. Now I normally like to leave a little bit too much on there, and I'll file away to make it smooth at the end. If you're confident, you can go quite close to it and then do that sort of method. But from experience, when I've snipped the ends of the pins off, these collars are just completely shot across the room, and it becomes really inconvenient trying to find them. So I'm just going to use a pair of pliers just to cut these pins down to a rough sort of length, which I would sort of use. I'm going to go for about that much. Just snip it off, and I'm going to leave myself, as I mentioned, a little bit too much, but enough so that I have plenty down there to peen down. And then the same with this middle one here. This also has a collar. And then this one here doesn't. This is just peened down as normal flat. So you can go a little bit lower with this, just like so. And then we can see we have our pins all cut down to sort of size. and we'll just go about peening them now. So I generally just put one on at a time because with experience, I've put them all on, started peening, and they've all started flying off. So we'll just put a little collar over the top like that. We'll go over to the vise and then we'll go through peening. Okay, so we're over at the vise. Here is the knife ready to do. Now I'm going to be the other side of the camera, so hopefully I'll be in frame. Just going to hold it on the vise, on the pivot underneath. So you want to make sure you rest this part on something very flat and heavy. Now I've tightened the vise up so it's flat on the top. I'm going to pop it down like that, hold it as steady as possible. Now, believe it or not, you don't want to be hitting it as hard as you think. That's a mistake I made at the start, and then the pivots are too tight. And you just want to sort of just go about tapping that down. Just sort of working that end slowly flatter. Just like so. And then you want to check the action every so often just to make sure it's not gone too tight. And well, that never happens. That's actually perfect. See that on there? Peen down, no wobble, nothing. Not too tight. And we would obviously then at the end, so you can see there's a little bit sticking up. I don't know if you can make that out there on the top of the pin here, which will file down. But that's the first one pretty much done. We'll grab another collar. So I like to do either end first, just so you've got it all sort of put together and you haven't got to worry about trying to do this one and if this one's going to ping off. Another tip, if you're going to do it, open the corkscrew for this one, or you end up resting on the corkscrew and then it doesn't go correctly. We're going to hold that down again on there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's check the action on that. No wobble. Check a couple of tools. Nice snap. Nice snap. Yeah, happy with that. Very happy with that. Now we'll go ahead and do the middle one just here. And of course that is a slightly smaller collar, with it being 2.2mm and the end ones being 2.5. I believe that is the correct size. If I'm wrong, I'm very, very sorry. And this one is a little bit more difficult. You need to sort of balance it away from the corkscrew. That's why I sort of tend to hold it like this, really, over on the end like that, while pushing pressure down. A little bit more on that one. Okay, now this one you don't need to go super tight with because it doesn't really hold anything together, just enough for the collars not to wobble. That's pretty much it. Action is still good. Action is still good. Now finally we're going to peen down this one here, which holds the punch and the corkscrew through. This one again doesn't have to be super tight, I like to just sort of flatten this one over just enough so that it's not going to come apart, but enough so that you maintain the action. No wobble. This one is always hardest for me to get out. I always break my nail on the punch, but I can get it out. I just can't right this second. Oh, there we go. In there, nice snap. Perfect. Let's go back to the bench and we'll go about oiling, checking over what I've done, filing off these little end bits here, and then we can pretty much chuck some scales on it and we're good to go. Okay, so I have my Dremel out here with a little tiny sanding disc on the end, and I'm just going to use that to tidy up my work because I'm still new to peening. It's good enough that it's going to hold the knife together, but if you leave too much on either side of these, when you put the scales on, they're only sort of deep enough for these collars, so if you don't flatten them out, the scales aren't going to fit properly and it'll just have gaps between the liners and the scales and not look that great. So I'm just going to go ahead and Dremel off some of those. Now it doesn't take a lot, brass is very soft and easy to grind off, but we'll just go ahead and do that. Okay, that's pretty much all it takes. Not too much to grind off. Of course, you don't want to start grinding off, or sorry, sanding off the top of the pivots, and then if you take too much off, it'll actually loosen it back up and you'll have just undone all your work. You'll have to remake pins and then basically start from scratch. But you want to do enough so that it's still held together, but they're all nice and flat now. These two aren't sticking up too far. Sometimes if they're a little bit high, you can sand those down as well, but I can feel that those aren't. I'm going to sort of interfere with these smaller holes here. So next up, we are going to put the scales on, and I've gone for these sort of micarta scales, sort of like OD green, I would say. Pop these on. Might need to press them on depending. Yeah, the micarta ones, they're quite a tight fit, but that's what you want really with the scales. You don't want them falling off or just sort of wobbling around and looking loose. So I'm just going to quickly press those in the vise while I'm here. There's nothing really to see, it's just me squeezing the Swiss Army knife scales on. If you change the scales on your Swiss Army knives, you'll know exactly how to do this. Sometimes it doesn't need to be done, you can clip them on, especially with the Celador, but the micarta ones, they do need a bit more persuasion. And there we go. See, we have liners all on there. We can put the scale tools in, the tweezers on the front, the toothpick on the back. It can be oiled up. Now I like to use the Victorinox oil for the Victorinox knives. It's a little bit thicker, doesn't last as long, I will say, as some of the thinner oils. It kind of gets clogged up a little over time, but for general day-to-day use, I think it's absolutely perfect. I always find I get the best action on a Swiss Army knife for using that. So that one's done. Just going to put a little bit on the back tools, so open up that corkscrew and that punch as well. Put a little bit down inside the channel. Very tiny amount for these, otherwise it sort of, once you close it down, it just like jets up the top, and that's just not really necessary. Wipe that all off there. Works well. All works well. All that's left to do now, sort of final touches, is we will put a nice little lanyard on it. So take some paracord, and I'll use the trusty scissors on another Victorinox I've got here. And we will burn the end of this, or melt the end I should say, just to stop it fraying. Anyone's ever done paracord, you know at this point it sucks because it's hot, basically hot plastic, and you have to burn yourself to sort of melt the end, but not too bad. So nice bit of paracord. We'll get, I don't know, a bead that matches the scales. That's a pretty good match. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys, of just sort of a basic how to basically build a Victorinox Swiss Army knife. Now, you don't need that jig at all. My first sort of 5 or 6, maybe more, I did without the jig. You can still do it, it's just a little bit wobbly. It's not the end of the world. But the jig, honestly, really, really does help. It's like the correct tool for the job, basically. You know, you don't want to be struggling. If you can get the correct tool, just go ahead and do it. We're just going to sort of tie that on there. Nothing too nuts, just a nice simple knot. And there we have it. Custom Victorinox built from start to finish. I really hope you enjoyed this. Please be sure, if you want to see any more videos like this, or any more sort of different how-tos with Victorinox knives, please let me know. I'm more than happy to film stuff like this for you guys. I really enjoy putting these knives together. But make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.
Matt's got a channel, man sharp as a blade. Slipjoint Sawyer is the name he made. Pocket knives until they flow with flair. Restoration's done with craftsman's care. Rusty steel polish bright in his hands. Old souls revived with a steady glance. Views keep climbing like a jagged peak. One shot riddles, hammer sparks they speak. Slipjoint Sawyer grinding through the night. Pocket knives gleam under flickering light. Matt's got the touch, man, turning steel to gold. Every story cut deep, every piece sold.